foster care in Unparalleled journey.
Strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts.
If you'd like to share your story or find our socials, including Patreon, go to fostercarenation.com. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason.
And Amanda.
Today we're here to talk with Heather. I messaged Heather somewhere on Facebook or maybe Instagram or something like that. You lose track of that stuff when you get old and you have a lot of kids and they take away your brain and you don't have memory left anymore. But Heather reached out to me or I reached out to her, one of the two, and we talked a little bit and I went, wow, you got a story to tell. You have quite the story to tell. And so I wanted to bring you on here today and let you tell your story to the world because, we'll get into all the details of it, but it's quite a story and you've really made something of yourself coming out of it. And that's one of the things that I've always wanted to make certain that we do with this. We're not here to just sell somebody's tragedy. As a matter of fact, our real hope here is that we can peddle some hope out to the masses. We can show people that there is a hope worth finding. And I think that's what your story has to tell us today. How are you doing today, Heather?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Doing
well.
awesome.
Hopefully there's not too much noise in the background because I have a 5-year-old who I think is throwing a fit on the other side of that wall right there. So if it's too loud, guys, I'm sorry, but this is real life and we have a lot of real kids. So hopefully the noise doesn't get too bad. If so, we'll have to go duct tape them to a wall or something.
Duct tape's very useful for that.
So Heather, I know you said that you were in foster care. You came in at a very young age. How old was you then?
So I went into foster care at the age of 1 with my sister. She was 2 at the time, or 3. But I was 1. And before I went into foster care, I was, first of all, let me backtrack. So I was born to an alcoholic mother who has an addiction to alcohol. And I say has because she still has it. I was born with Fetal Alcohol Syndrome.
Alcohol exposure during pregnancy can be harmful to the brain of a developing baby and may result in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Heather's going to tell us some of the story that she experienced because of that exact thing.
For those that aren't aware of what that is, basically she drank heavily while pregnant with me, and therefore I have a piece of my brain that's missing, and that affects the memory portion. So fetal alcohol syndrome is a brain injury, not a mental illness. I'm just going to clear that out of the air because a lot of people think that it's a mental illness and it's actually a brain injury. So my birth mom was abusive, not only to me and my sister, but to my own biological father, who was a victim to her as well. And then at the age of 1, we went into foster care.
While it is a common misconception that most kids enter foster care at a very young age, the average age of kids who enter foster care is 8 years old, and only about 10% of them end up in a group home. Most of them end up living in a family situation.
I don't recall really what happened. I have paperwork, and the gist of it was she had been drinking or she had hurt one of us. That was the gist of it. From there, I was in foster care for 8.5 years. And in those 8.5 years, I had about 10 homes, roundabout, and each home, except for the last one, was very, very abusive. Physically abusive, sexually abusive, verbally abusive, mentally abusive, all aspects. And in those 8.5 years, the judge was, I believe, in my opinion, way too lenient and gave my birth mom way too many chances, but basically gave her ultimatums like, you need to get your act together or this is what's going to happen. And she would get her act together for a certain amount of time and they'd let me go back. Then something would happen and then out again. And the reason why we moved from home to home to home, why there were so many homes, was because my birth mom would literally get in the car drunk, driving, chasing us down the road, breaking into these people's homes, trying to get us. She would either grab my sister and leave me behind, or vice versa, or she would just grab us both. She would try to break into windows. She would just, it got to the point where a lot of the moms, foster moms, would call and say, hey, they have to go. This is becoming too much. You know, the mother is very volatile and we don't feel safe with her showing up at our door. So that's what she would do. She would literally like follow the caseworker to the house, like stalk her, like harass her. And very, very violent, to the point where even police officers would have to climb in through a bedroom window to get us out. Those are just some of the like lesser of the evil events, but the more painful ones, there were times where basically my birth mother would kidnap my sister and leave me in an abusive home, and I didn't know where my sister was for probably 2.5 weeks. In that home, I was molested and raped, and that home, I was sadly in that home for an extra 3 months because DCF refused to take us out. DCF was called, the cops were called, the cops did not believe us, didn't believe my sister. DCF didn't really buy it, and they did absolutely nothing. So that's a whole different, like, my rage with DCF has gone with them on a different topic and a different level because of that. But eventually, I was removed from that home because they called and were just like, hey, you know, my wife is dying and we can't take her anymore. So that's the gist of the whole situation of why we were in so many homes, was because my birth mom was abusive and she would grab us, kidnap us, hurt us. There was even another incident where we were in a car, there was a car behind us, my birth mom was behind that car, she was drunk, she hit us, and I woke up to my sister through the windshield and not moving. So these are very traumatic events that happened. And then there was another incident when I was 5 years old on Christmas where there was money exchange between my birth mom and her brother-in-law, and I ended up being raped on that day. So there's a lot of events as to why I was permanently removed from my birth mom. Her rights were eventually taken. They ended up taking her rights away because she basically refused to help. Like, she just chose her addiction over us. And that ended when I was probably about 6 years old. That was the last time I'd seen my dad for a short time, but that was the last time I was ever going to see my birth mom. And then from there, when I was 8.5, I was adopted by my aunt, my dad's sister.
In most states, family is given preference over foster homes because they believe it is best to keep a child with a biological family member, which is often the case, but not always, as Heather's going to tell us.
Who I wholeheartedly believe that her heart was in the right place and that her intention was good. I never questioned that, and I never questioned her heart as far as, like, she wanted the best for us and she wanted us out of the situation. And she wanted us to be able, and I say us, meaning my sister and I, she wanted us to be able to still have contact with our birth dad, to be able to go see him, talk to him, call him on the phone, and have some kind of a relationship with him, even though we were moving from Maine to Connecticut. Maine is where I was in foster care. Connecticut's where I ended up living for 21 years. So even though there was this big distance between us, my aunt really wanted to keep us in the family so we could have that relationship with my father. And while that was honorable to an extent, and while that she may have meant well by that, and I believe her heart was in the right place, she actually was the one that ended up causing more damage. She ended up being physically abusive, spiritually abusive to me. I ended up being raised in a cult for 21 years. In the beginning, it wasn't like that, but it got worse in my teen years, where I was molested by one of the pastors from the ages of 13 and 19. And my aunt that was her way of dealing with my outburst. She thought I would have temper tantrums, but they weren't really temper tantrums. I was having emotional breakdowns. No, I didn't have the skills to cope with a lot of it. I had just moved into this house that I knew nothing about. Moving to a state I knew nothing about. I was taken out of counseling. I was, moved from this home that I had been with for 3.5 years, where I was finally safe. And so all of a sudden, I'm moving to this foreign land, so to speak, where I didn't know anybody. I only knew my aunt. I only knew, my uncle who had helped us move, and my sister. And I didn't have anything comforting. I didn't have anything there that was familiar to me. So of course I was traumatized. So of course I was freaking out. So of course I was having meltdowns because where's my dad? Like, why can't I see my father? Like, where is he? Why did you take me all the way over here, away from him? Her way of dealing with those, she thought were, oh, Heather's having a spiritual issue. It's a spiritual problem. This needs to be dealt with, so we need to call the pastor. And of course, I'm going to spare everyone details, but my aunt has been confronted on the issue, and it's not good. But it didn't go well. And sadly, it happened until I was 19, where it ended. But then 21 years when I was 21, she went on a rampage of just thinking I sinned, thinking I had committed this horrible sin of abominations and adultery. And not to make light of anyone's beliefs or not to poke fun or anything, but I'm sorry, but I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't even know what the word means. I'm nonetheless understand what's an abomination. 21 with a brain injury, with a learning challenge, with a learning disability. What's that? I don't know what that word means. I don't know what fornication means. I don't know what abomination is. So I'm being accused of all these things that I'm supposed to be doing, but what am I doing? So she ended up leaving me homeless in a hotel for 3 nights in Boston, Massachusetts, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, actually, and was like, "You're not coming back to my house until you've gone on your knees and repented." Just adamant about I needed to repent and change my ways, because supposedly I was doing abominations and witchcraft. I just calmed down and pretended to have my act together just to get home. So I'm like, I want out. Like, just get me out of here. And then we get home. She didn't want any of my stuff in the house. She didn't even want me in the house, but she didn't want to leave me alone in the house. And there was a night where I was in the kitchen, and I was actually talking to my birth mom at the time, telling her what was going on, like, hey, like, my aunt just took me out of school, like, I don't know why, like, she's saying I'm doing these things against the cult, like, I'm not following their beliefs or their rules and law. So long and short of it, I became suicidal.
According to research at a study at the University of South Wales, suicide attempts are 3 times more likely by people who have experienced child sexual abuse, and 2.5 times more likely by people who experienced physical abuse as a child.
I grabbed a butcher knife and held it to my throat, and that was the end of it. And she ended up calling the cops, because at one point I pointed the knife at her. It never touched her. It just to scare her, to be like, hey, like, I'm trying to get your attention. I'm telling you, I'm being triggered. I'm being re-traumatized. I need you to freaking listen. And that was just the point where I go up to my room, and next thing you know, I hear pounding on the front door. She had called the cops, told the cops that I had brought the knife to my room, which was not true at all. Next thing I know, they're barging into my room. An officer's got my hands behind my back, which for someone, that's traumatizing to a special needs child, especially when they don't know what's going on, like when they're already traumatized. And so I was trying to hide in my closet. I was trying to get in my closet and hide. I just wanted to be done. And so the officer, she was basically, the gist of it was 2 ways. You can go willingly, or we can force you to go. So of course I was like, please get me out of here. Like, I'll go. And then from there I was on 48 watch in a psych ward in a hospital, and I was fine after 24 hours. And the next day I'm ready to be discharged, and the social worker comes in the room and was like, you're ready to go. You need to call her. She has to come get you. And I said, okay, well, I can guarantee you she won't. Lo and behold, my aunt was like, no, I told you you're done. You're not welcome back to my house. The Lord told me that you're not to come back to my house and that you're on your own. So basically, she's saying the Lord told her to leave me homeless, which, I'm going to go on a side note here. Please, somebody that reads their Bible, please tell me where it says it's okay to do that. Please tell me where it, because I read my Bible and I'm pretty sure Jesus doesn't say that specifically.
I don't think I've ever heard that verse.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't recall reading that verse specifically where it says, parents, leave your children homeless, or, okay. Side note, but getting back to the story, in all seriousness, so she came and picked me up because the social worker had some very colorful words to say to her, and basically was like, you have to come get her. The least you could do is take her to a friend or a homeless shelter. So she took me to a homeless shelter. That was my first time experiencing a homeless shelter in Manchester, Connecticut.
Among former foster youth with known outcomes, 36% become homeless at some point.
I was next to pedophiles, drug dealers, drug abusers. I mean, people I didn't know. And at that time, I was still in contact with my birth mom, and no one was helping me. So my birth mom agreed to come get me. So I had met my birth mom for the first time when I was 21. It was, but it wasn't what I thought. Like, yes, we hugged each other, we embraced each other, but I didn't get the answers that I was wanting. And I'm going to have to backtrack on that story because there's a piece of that I didn't share. But she ended up smelling, when she came to get me, she smelled of alcohol. Looking back at it now, I'm like, nope, that was the wrong move. I should not have gone with her. But I did. But my emotions were everywhere. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'd just been left homeless with $5 to my name, nowhere to go. So she was saying she was going to help. So I went with her. And of course she smelled like alcohol, and we get back to Maine, and within a week of being with her, she assaulted me. And then from there, I went into a psych ward for about a week. To backtrack, I first had contact with my birth mom at 16. So from the ages of 16 to 18, communication had been reopened to my birth mom, actually from my biological sister who was in foster care with me. She had opened that communication. Sadly, it opened a can of worms for me, but at the same time, I needed to have questions answered. And so for my sister, it was more like, are you my birth mom? For me, it was, I want answers. And I had a list. I wrote down on a list I wrote down on paper, a list of questions. And why did you do this? Why did you do B? Why did you do W, X, Y, And I know my aunt, she was really upset because I had done it behind her back. And I know that was hurtful, but at the same time, it was like, listen, I'm not trying to hurt you. It's like, I deserve answers. I deserve an explanation. Maybe not so much an apology, but maybe some ownership. And that's really all I've been wanting, is ownership and an apology. And still, and that's kind of where I struggle right now. It's like, as much as I know, logically, I'll never get that. I'll never get it, because she's still an alcoholic and she's still gonna fight that to her death. But the little girl with me would like an apology or like an explanation. And so I wrote her these letters, and basically the letters came back. She came back with responses of, you must be remembering something that's in foster care. You were with me at the time that never happened, or trashing my father, or trashing his side of the family. And it's like, or blaming DCF, or blaming foster care. And while she had valid points, yes, part of it was foster care's issues, part of it was DCF issues. However, why am I in foster care? I'm in foster care because of you. Don't put it on my father, don't put it on my grandparents. That's not their fault. You had choices, you made your choices. The saying, you made your bed, you lay in it. And that's what she's doing now. And then we exchanged maybe 4 or 5 letters back and forth, and then on my 18th birthday, she sent me a gift, so to speak, and that was it, more or less, of, I miss you, you're always going to be my baby girl, and I remember this and that, just wanting to focus on the now and the future. but not wanting to take ownership or acknowledge or talk about what had happened or own any of it, really. I had a relationship with her from 2006 when everything happened at the hospital, on and off until 2011. And then that's when everything just stopped. My sister wrote her a letter and was like, "We're done. You're not owning anything that you've done." Basically defending me. My sister's been saying, Heather's the way she is because you gave her fetal alcohol syndrome. She's trying to express to you how she's feeling, and it's gotten to the point where now you've pushed one too many buttons, and so yes, now she's freaking out, and now she's having a temper tantrum, so to speak. Really, she's having a mental breakdown. And so that's her way of responding, and she doesn't know any better. So we're not talking to you. We don't want to hear from you until you own up to your mistake. So I haven't heard from her. The last time I heard from her was 2 years ago when my birth dad died. He passed away 2 years ago. And the day after he died, she somehow found out, which I'm not surprised she would. It's the town that she's in. Maine is a small state. So the town that I was born in, the town that she lives in, it's very small. People find out. And there's only one family of the last name in the whole state of Maine. So anybody knows it's our family. And she sent me a message just basically saying, "I'm sorry to hear about your father." And she's like, "I know you don't want much to do with me, but if you ever need to talk, I'm always here for you." And I'm just kind of like, huh? Like, where was this, 30 years ago? Where was this 21 years ago? Like, where was this caring then? Where was this wanting to be in my life then? Like, so I never responded, but I don't talk to her now. So that's the gist of my story. I know I kind of jumped around, but I try to stay on track for the most part. But that's my story. Yep.
That's the story. What a ride, my dear. What a ride. Wow.
Yep.
There's a lot there. Wow, I'm trying to decide, where to start. What do I say? And
How early do you remember? How young do you remember of your experience? I mean, obviously you probably don't remember going into foster care.
I started remembering things when I was 2 years old, believe it or not. And I know that that's controversy because a lot of people will say, "Well, you're 2, your brain isn't developed." But you kind of remember things. There are certain things you do remember. So I started remembering some things, remembering at the age of 2, and then at the age of 3, that's kind of when like everything just full-fledged went into action and it all went down.
what kind of memories did you have at 2?
Mostly like my birth mom drinking, going back and forth to mom's house, or dad picking me up, spending a more time with my grandparents on his side than my dad or than my birth mom. Why more kind of like, where's my mother? Like, why can't I be around her? Kind of like mainly memories of being with my dad's side of the family, and like, why? Like, not that was a bad thing for me. I'm not complaining about that, but just the curiosity, like, what's going on? Confusion, really.
Well, you mentioned your dad. Why was your dad not able to take care of you?
So he, I might get emotional, so I apologize.
Emotion is fine.
So they did tell him, the DCF workers did say, you have the opportunity here to step up and be a dad and do this. However, these are the rules. These are the expectations. And as you know, DCF has a whole list of expectations.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to jump through hoops. And those hoops were, he had to find a 3-bedroom apartment, and he had to have a job that was going to provide. And he was born with a disability, and I don't recall the name of the disability or what he has, but it was hard for him to find work. He had to get a 3-bedroom apartment because, he had to have a job that was going to provide. And he was born with a disability, and I don't recall the name of the disability or what he has, but it was hard for him to find work. He had to get a 3-bedroom apartment because, he had to have a job that was going to provide. they wouldn't let me and my sister share a room. We had to have separate rooms. If you're going to be living, if you're going to be having your daughters, you need their own room. I guess they were concerned of any sexual abuse that could happen, which he never did. He was never physically violent with me. He was never sexually abusive to me. He was just not present. He would be physically in a room, but just not there when I was older. So he had the opportunity, and he tried. He did try several times, okay, like, and I know, like, my grandmother tried to help him too, like, hey, like, let's look for an apartment, let's find you something. In the end, it didn't end up working for him. Like, he just couldn't do it. It was, he gave up. And that's where my anger part comes in, because it's like, okay, I wish back in the 80s, I know there probably wasn't a lot of resources, and it's like, I wish maybe I keep thinking, like, maybe if he had more resources, more help from the state, instead of just throwing this all at him, like, this is your responsibility. And yeah, it was. They should have helped him out a little bit more. And I think he was feeling stressed about it, and just realized, like, I can't do this, like, on my own as a single dad. It's hard. So yeah, even though he tried, I wish he had tried harder, because even after I was adopted, and even after I was living with my aunt, there were opportunities where he could have stepped up in other ways. It's interesting because he never really talks. It's always us reaching out to him, or it was my aunt telling him, like, okay, well, it's Heather's high school graduation. It would mean a lot for her to be there. You should be there. So he came, but he only do things if he was told or suggested that you show up. So he didn't really want much to do with me, as sad as that is. And it was because I reminded him too much of foster care. That pain was too much for him. And while I had compassion and understanding for that, it destroyed me in the end, because all I wanted was to have a relationship. He never really had that connection of talking. He was just very quiet. Like, yes, I saw him every Christmas. That was amazing. Like, my aunt would drive us back to Maine every Christmas. So I got to see him Christmas every year. And that's well and great, but there was still that connection missing. Like, we would sit in the living room, and all he would do was watch TV. Like, well, that's great, Dad. I can watch TV anytime, but I'm here visiting you. Like, let's talk. Like, let's go do something. Let's have some time together. Like, don't just sit there and read a newspaper. So there was just, and I think that was his way of coping with it. But then when everything went down with my aunt, like, I feel like that's when I wish he would have stepped up. Because that was a beautiful opportunity. That would have been a beautiful opportunity. And it was a beautiful opportunity for him to step up and do something, whether it was, you can stay here with me until you can get a job, or let me give you some money so you have, something to eat, anything. It would have been, the gesture would have it would have done a lot. And though he defended me, and though he said, what she did wasn't right, he never actually defended me to her. He never actually said to her, what you're doing is not okay. I'm not okay with what you did to my daughter. Like, so that was the hurtful part of it. But in the end, he chose his other family. He chose my half sister. He chose my stepmom. I flew out twice to see him before he died. And my stepmom really wouldn't let me be alone in the room with him, which was very frustrating, because my whole intent of going to make my peace with my father was, I just wanted him to know that I didn't hate him, that I went through a stage where I hated him, when I was angry with him, but I wanted him to know, like, in that moment, like, I don't hate you. Like, we were put in this horrible situation, crappy situation, and it wasn't your fault. It wasn't our fault. It's her fault. It's our mother's fault. And it sucked, but I'm not angry at you. And I know you tried. I just miss you. Like, I just wanted him to know that, but I never actually really got to say that because I never actually got to be alone with him. But the last trip I made up he was going to my grandparents' house on his side of the family, which is where he was living. I just walked in. I was like, okay, I'm at Grammy's house now, but it didn't feel like my grandmother's because my stepmom just made it into her own, and it didn't feel welcoming. And I just wanted to see my dad, and we talked, and I asked him how he was feeling, and just I felt helpless because I wanted to take care of him the way he tried to take care of me, but I didn't know how because he's sick with cancer. And sorry, did not gonna get emotional.
You're okay. You're all right.
So my last time with him, so the social worker was there, and she was talking to me, and of course I'm just looking at her like, yeah, I know who you are. I'm not stupid. Like, you don't gotta explain it. Like, but she was just doing her job, and so he eventually got tired and wanted to go lay down, and so I got up to give him a hug, and he literally held me for a good 5 minutes, and that was it. There were no words exchanged, and I don't know if that's how it was supposed to be. I'll never know. But in that moment, it was like I finally felt safe again. And so that he ended up passing away 2 days later, which I didn't go. I didn't go to a service because I couldn't afford another $800 to fly out. And they didn't really do much. Yeah, it's expensive. And so I really didn't have much. And I also had made the personal choice of, I just don't want to be around family who don't want me. So that was that. Sorry.
You're totally fine. I lost my own father about it's been
6 years.
5.5 years ago now. Yeah.
We're going on 6.
And lost him to cancer. I understand the struggle. It's not an easy topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Do you think that your father's disabilities were just too overwhelming for him?
Yeah, and I think that was part of the issue. And back then, they didn't probably have a lot of the resources that they do now for people with disabilities. Like I know here in Tennessee, they advocate very strongly for disabled children, disabled adults, and there's great programs. Same with the state of Connecticut. I know there's a lot of great programs and a lot of great resources and help for disabled adults, disabled children. So back in the 80s, I don't know what his options were, and that may have been a part of the major issue. Yes, I think that was a part of the problem.
Well, I'm not quite old enough to give you too much definition of what the 80s were in that world because I was a youth myself during that time frame, but yeah, as I remember it, the 1980s were a different world for sure.
Yeah,
we did not have the things available that there is now to us. Mm-hmm. So I'm certain that was a hard struggle for him. As a dad, I can't imagine being put in that position either.
Yeah.
You talked about what I believe you said 10 different foster homes roughly?
Yes.
And 9 of them were abusive.
Correct.
Now, as a foster family, we've had roughly 20 kids come to our house. I can genuinely see a kid looking at, a couple specific kids seeing something as maybe being abusive, where it really was just a matter of, look, I said, this is the rules here. If you do this, you don't get that. It's going to always be, if, these are the boundaries, these are clear-cut boundaries. But for kids who've never had clear-cut boundaries, I can see them really seeing that in a different light. Kids who've had specific traumas, thinking that something was leading up to something. It took me a while to really learn to look at the kids that are in our home sometimes and understand that when I see a kid who's struggling around food, mm-hmm. that there's oftentimes a problem with a food thing for them. They were perhaps not fed on a regular basis, and so they're constantly trying to get food. We've experienced that recently with a young kid who's always wanting extra, always wanting seconds, always wanting thirds, always wanting fours. You go, whoa, hang on. I'm not trying to give you diabetes at 3. you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so for them, their perception could really look that way. I can totally understand that. But it sounds to me like, that's not what you experienced at all.
No, not at all.
When I hear people talk about problems in the foster care system, I'd like to think that, that we're looking at more of the perception issues from a kid rather than these horrible stories. But I've heard the horrible stories. It sounds like you've lived some of those stories. How do you think living through that as a young child has affected who you've become as a woman today?
Um, it's left me not trust not say trustworthy, but I don't trust people. I don't. I have an issue with trust. Like I'm working on it. I'm trying to work through some of those issues, But when I hear foster stories, I'm just like, well, that's great. Like my attitude, well, that's great. Yeah, that didn't happen to me. The very negative side of it, and it's like if you only knew, like it just angers me because it's like I want to believe that there's good people out there, but that's not my case. That's not my story. That's not what happened, So it's just very hard to trust people, just trust in general.
How has that affected your relationships as you've grown and gotten older?
Um, it's been difficult. Again, it's been hard because it's like I want to trust this person, but I don't know your intent. For example, I'll use my own sister, my biological sister, because we don't really talk, and there's been a lot of conflict in history with us. I don't trust her, and that's because of things that she's done. She's betrayed my trust, where she's given information to a foster family that we have contact with still, and it's like, but they've made a choice to betray me, and to disown me and shun me, and because I don't follow their beliefs, and she's still choosing to talk to them, and it's like, no, I don't want you mentioning my name. I don't want you telling my info to them because they can know how to reach out to me. So it's the little things that she does, and it's the little things that people do. Don't betray my trust, because then I'm gonna second question who you are. And it's like, I don't like being lied to. So if I feel like I'm being lied to, that's an automatic, I don't trust you, and I put them out of my circle. I have my inner circle and I have my outer circle, and I keep them way across the hall, like across, because I just don't trust them. And I'm like, until I can trust you, I don't have anything to say. So it's hard.
Well, I mean, with everything that you've been through and, everything growing up, I would imagine it's extremely hard to trust somebody. I would say that it'd be really hard to let somebody into that circle
Hmm.
because I mean, I've been there. I should have been in care and wasn't. I had a pretty crappy upbringing, and I know from personal experience how hard it is to let somebody in.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there is a significant amount of trust loss, especially when it comes to men.
Hmm.
Has that affected your romantic relationships as you've gotten older?
Yes. It's actually interesting because it's mainly women that I have a hard time trusting. It's men too, but it's actually mostly women. With men, it's more of, I always just pick the wrong. Really, it's always a bad relationship scenario. It's just I'm always picking the wrong kind of a person. Where I'm like, okay, what's your ulterior motive? What do you want? Like, kind of, that's my attitude. But with women, it's more or less like I'm always wanting to find that mother figure, or I've always wanted to have that mother figure in my life, and so I go after somebody who I thought would be the perfect mother, or would be the perfect mother, and they end up being not. And I find out that there's somebody else, or that they're living this kind of a lifestyle. So I just want family. So I tend to go after not good living situations, so to speak. And I'll give kind of I didn't share this part of my story, but I'll go into a little detail. there was a time back in 2012 where I was being harassed and stalked by a pedophile, and I felt the only way to be safe was to move out of the state of Maine. So I moved down to Florida. I met this woman on Facebook, and I met her in a domestic violence support group, and she claims, or she still claims, that she's running a underground domestic violence rescue business. Too good to be true, right? Well, sure enough, I get down there, and I'm leaving out some detail just for the sake of time, but she was supposed to come get me. That didn't happen. She supposedly broke down in Maryland, yada, yada, yada. I ended up taking a Greyhound bus all the way from Maine to Florida, which was that was like my first. I mean, I've done like a 2-hour ride to Boston, like, but I've by myself from Maine to Florida, which was an interesting experience.
Probably nerve-wracking.
Nerve-wracking and fun at the same time. But anyway, so I get down there not knowing if this woman's going to show up or not. I have my stuff. Sure enough, she shows up, and I'm not going to mention her name. Although she should be on America's Most Wanted, but she's not. But anyway, I'm not going to mention her name, because she also has 7 children, and just in case if any of them are listening, I don't want to name names, and for my safety. So sure enough, we get there. She's in this beautiful rental house, and at the time she had 5 kids, and we're there, and it was the honeymoon stage, and everything was great. She was helping me out, yada, yada, yada. I had transferred my Section 8 down to Florida. Well, sure enough, a month later, everything goes haywire in a handbasket, and she starts throwing my phone in the lake. She starts blocking me from Wi-Fi. She gets physically abusive, and she gets, taking my food stamps, and she ended up losing the house because it was on foreclosure. So we ended up homeless, and we had to stay in hotels, and sure enough, she started hanging out with prostitutes, and we're like, I'm like, what are you doing? Of course, not knowing even know what that was, didn't even know. I'm like, what's going on? So of course, I'm just asking questions because I'm curious. I'm like 25, 26 at the time. Like, what? Like, not even having a clue. I don't even know what that is. And sure enough, only to find out she was hanging out with her because that's what eventually she started doing. So, long story made short, I end up moving out of this woman's house at least 3 times and moved back in with her 4 times. And the 4th time, she left me homeless because I would not prostitute. And oh well, I'm not gonna, I realized that could have ended way worse, and it could have been more dangerous than it was, but it was dangerous, but her leaving me homeless was a blessing in disguise, just because that was my way out. But the woman is still running her business out in Arizona now. So and the reason why I shared that story was because I know the questions are going to be, some are asking probably, well, why did you move back in with her 4 times? Like, come on, Heather, get it together. I moved because I wanted a family. I wanted a family so bad. Like, I wanted that mother figure so bad. And that was what I wanted. Was it wrong for me to keep moving in and out? Yes. I realize that now. That was the wrong choice. That was the wrong decision. I made that wrong move. I should have done my research a little better. And am I saying everybody you meet on Facebook is a criminal? No. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that they're bad. But what I'm saying is I should have done more research. I should have done my research more carefully. I should have been a little more precautious. I should have done a little more research on her business, made sure it was legit. I should have done my homework, so to speak, and I should have just quit when I not had gone back, but I went back, and I ended up being left homeless, and from there I ended up getting help from another church, and then from there I'm fine now. But that's my, when I say women are my weakness, is because I go after that mother figure that I so desperately have wanted and needed, which I have that mother figure now, but then I was looking in all the wrong places and I was going after the people that had the wrong intent, the bad intent, you know?
Right, because you were seeking that mom so bad
Yeah.
and wanting that relationship and connection.
Mm-hmm.
How hard was it to stand up for yourself and say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be a prostitute. I mean, that must have taken a lot to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, like that was a given. Like I was like, no, are you kidding me? Like I'll go sleep in a church parking lot before I do that. Like, no, that's just not. So saying no to her with that wasn't the issue. Like that's not, I was like, heck no, goodbye. Like we're done. And I had confronted her on it too. And she was like, that's not true. I just asked if she had a compassionate heart and understand that I'm a single mom and I got to do what I got to do. And I'm like, okay, we're done. Like, that you don't ask. And she knew my trauma. She knew my history. And she knew everything that I've been through. Like, you don't ask somebody who's been in foster care to do that. You don't put somebody in that kind of a situation. So saying no to her was pretty. I was like, that's it. That was my breaking point.
You know, you mentioned earlier that you were 25 or 26 years old and, you know, didn't even really know what prostitution was at that point. And where a lot of people will hear that and think that doesn't make sense. By that age, most people at least heard the word and know what it means. I was raised in a completely different cult. My family gets upset when I call it a cult because they're still part of that. But there was no sexual abuse in what I grew up in. It was a very fundamentalist Christian cult. But when you grow up in that world, your mind is shaped in a very specific way, and certain things are just not talked about. Certain things are just not explained, and I can totally understand why at that age that would be something that you wouldn't have had any exposure at all to.
Right.
You know, that makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things you talked about a lot through your story there is how DCF was almost complicit in your abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think they had such a hard time believing a kid who was telling stories about things that were obviously not stories that kids should be able to make up if they hadn't seen some horrible things?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I just know that DCF was called. There was a call that was made. I know my sister had called the police, but the police didn't buy it. The police didn't believe it. I don't know why. I don't. Still to this day, I probably will never know. But it now it outrages me because that's ridiculous. Like a DCF worker gets a call and a child's been hurt the way that I was. Like that is a red flag. There should be a red flag to a DCF worker. Like, boom, we got to go get her out. Like, don't make them stay in a home for 3 more months. Like, and have to endure that abuse. I don't know. I'm speculating, but I'm wondering if the elderly parents told, or the elderly father was like, no, my son wouldn't do that. Like, convinced them, like, yeah, we're fine. But then 3 months later, they call and they're like, hey, my wife is dying. Like, they can't live here anymore. And so finally we were removed, but no, I think eventually he was arrested. That calls were made and he was arrested. I don't know. I don't know, because I'm sure these people are no longer alive. Which is for my safety is probably a good thing. So I don't know, but it outrages me when I hear stories of DCF workers who get calls and do nothing. There was actually just this year in the state of Maine, my home state, in February, there were 2 children, and this is all accurate. Actually, anybody can Google this, look it up. It's all over the newspaper. It's all over the internet. 2 children, a girl and a boy, 10 years old and 9 years old, or 10 and 8, I think. Their mother beat them to death, and they were in state custody. But then somehow the parents got them back temporarily, and it was in that time frame that the mother had beaten them to death. Between 40 to 45 calls were made to DCF, and they did nothing about it. 40, and this is true, 40 40 to 45 calls were made and to DCF, and DCF just sat there and did nothing. So that's where my rage comes in, because it's like, are you kidding me? Like,
Right, that's horrendous.
yeah, one call, I get it, but 45 calls and no one in that office could be like, hey, there's something that's going on. Like, let's go check this out. Like, and obviously they're in prison now, the parents, like, but, and I believe the DCF workers are being investigated, but come on, like, I could go on a rant right now, but like, like.
And how many homes were you placed in?
I was placed in 10.
10. And you said only 1 out of the 10 was a decent home?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yep.
The numbers should not be that way.
Nope.
And, I'm so sorry for any child that had to endure that.
Yep.
How did you endure that? How did you keep going as a child? I mean, what made you just keep getting up every day?
My sister and my dad. My sister was my main protector. When we became probably 3 and she was 5, like, we started looking out for each other, taking care of each other. I mean, there was one incident where we had just been brought to a home, and the DCF worker, I believe, informed them that I was special needs, which I don't like using that word because I don't see myself that way, but through their eyes, I was special needs, and they couldn't handle it. And so by the end of the day, that night, they called and DCF was back at the door. And I remember asking the foster mom, like, why can't I stay? Like, why can't I stay? And she just said, because you're different. You're basically retarded. Like, you're special needs. I can't handle you. And I remember just the DCF worker, like, she thought it was the funniest thing. Like, she thought it was funny. I don't know why. That just creeps me out. But I had nowhere to go, and I ended up sleeping on a bench, and it was snowing, and I was 5 years old. Like, sleeping on a bench. Like, what DCF worker does that? Makes a child sleep outside. So
I am so sorry. I have no other words to say other than,
yeah,
nobody should be treated that way.
no child should be treated that way.
I'm
And
so
thankfully,
sorry
like,
that you were.
yeah, thankfully my sister did something about it. Was like, listen, like, you can't just leave her outside. Like, she's
Is your sister older than you, or?
Yeah, she's a year and a half older than me.
Okay.
So she's about 5 or 6. So she was able to articulate, like, you're leaving her outside, like, she's gonna freeze, like, she needs a blanket. She's able to communicate something. And then sure enough, like, they took me somewhere, and I don't know where it was, but yeah, DCF didn't really do a lot of caring per se. They did more. They really should have done the research on my aunt. That's where they really should have stuck the nail in the coffin. They really should have, investigated her more. Not to say that she was a criminal or she had a bad history or anything like that, but they really should have made her do trauma classes. They really should have made her.
I'm sorry, but anybody who lets a child be sexually abused, I'm sorry, they're a criminal in my eyes.
Yeah.
Heather, I said something at the beginning of this conversation that I really want to stick to, and that is that I really, really, am moved by the depth of your story, and I know our listeners will be as well. Our main goal is not just to traffic in someone else's trauma. What I'd like to hear is how you managed to walk through this trauma, through this pain. Like, this is a big load of pain. That's a big load of trauma that most people would not be able to walk through and lead a normal life into their future. What has brought you to the place you're at today? Where's the strength come from? What steps have you taken to get yourself through that hard place? Because as I look through the social medias, as I read things on Reddit, and I look through the Facebook posts and the different pages, I see people who are adults and struggling hard still.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell them that you used to help bring yourself through that?
That's a good question, good statement. So for the first and foremost, having an outlet, having a positive outlet. And I know it may be small and trivial, but having an outlet. So when I was going through that abuse with my aunt, and being 13 and 14 and 18 and 19, and having, between being those and not having anybody to talk to, not having a friend, not being able to talk to anybody on the outside, so to speak, I had a positive outlet. So she really encouraged me with art and creativity. And so I had taken art classes in high school, and I really enjoyed it. And so that was my knick-knack, doing that, scrapbooking, journaling, and music. So those were my outlets growing up. With where's Heather? She's either in her room or downstairs in the basement painting, like not doing her homework, like hiding out, or she's down in the film room working on a scrapbook. I even scrapbooked in University of Connecticut was my favorite basketball team. I did scrapbooks of that, just having that positive outlet. So I'd be doing watercolor, just the water, and it doesn't have to be like expensive watercolors. Like it only was for me because I bought them, I owned them, I paid for them, it could be drugstore watercolor set, it doesn't have to be, it could be crayons for all I care. It doesn't matter. It was a form of art. And so that's how I got through it. I remember just being in my room and just grabbing colored pencils or whatever I could grab, coloring, letting it out. Music, I have tons of music. So we weren't really allowed to listen to a lot of Christian music, so to speak, growing up, even though you would think we were in a Christian church. But there is one specific woman who I listen to. Her name is Darlene Zek. She is the pastor. She's the lead worship leader for Hillsong out in Australia. I love her music. And so it was actually her music that got me through, that pulled me through a lot of the trauma. And it wasn't so much, yes, her voice was very calm and soothing, but it was the words, it was the passion in the music, that a lot of the words that she wrote was very touching to my heart. So that got me through. And then obviously having that positive outlet of, scrapbooking and painting and drawing and journaling. And so that I'm going to preach for that with that one for a second, because I feel like that is so important. I feel like right now there's so many young children, teens, young adults who have outlets, but they're not positive. They're not healthy. They're out doing drugs, or they're out doing drinking, or, there's no positive outlet. So it's really crucial to get that positive outlet. Even in my 20s, it was going to the YMCA and playing basketball for an hour. It was swimming. It was just looking at the resources I had in my own town. And so that's, if anyone's listening, if you're in that situation, you're in the situation I was in, go, a lot of the high schools in the towns, in your hometowns, will offer summer programs, will offer winter programs such as watercolor classes, or poetry classes, or drawing classes, or even just checking out your YMCA. Your local YMCA has a lot to offer for children, for adults, for teenagers, for youth, whether it's swimming, whether it's sports, whether it's summer camps. They offer summer camps. So that was another thing. Summer camp was my outlet, another big outlet, because I got to go out. I was out, I was making friends, I was talking to people outside of my situation. So again, I can't stress it enough. Having a positive outlet is how I'm getting through it. Having a positive outlet, having coping skills. I had coping skills up the wazoo for a while, and then they got put on the back burner because the therapist that I had for 9 years had passed away from breast cancer. And actually, I met her in the psych ward at a hospital. And she was in fact, I remember her saying very clearly to me, I was sitting in her office and crying my eyes out, telling her the situation and feeling sorry for myself, to be honest, and rightfully so. And an hour goes by and she's like, nope, I'm all done listening to this. You're not going to sit in my office anymore and be a victim. We're going to come up with a plan to get you out, to get you on your feet. I don't play the pity party. I don't play pity party games. We're all done with that. And that has stuck with me because it's like, oh, wait. I had to snap out of it. Like, there's more, not saying that my situation is less than, but there's other people in worse situations, and I have a choice. So she basically was saying, you have a choice. You can sit there and feel sorry for yourself and woe is me, or you can actually get up and do something. And so that's really been my fight this whole time, is just, yeah, it sucks. I was dealt crappy cards from the time I was born until now. I've been dealt crappy cards. It sucks. Not gonna lie. It sucks that I wake up with body aches every day. It sucks that I wake up with anxiety attacks. And it sucks that I can't, that my birth family doesn't talk to me. And it's horrible. And all these things have, but I'm choosing to do something. I'm choosing to live on my own. I'm supposed to be in a group home. And I'm renting a room about to be on my own, living in an apartment. Like, that doesn't happen to foster for a disabled person. And so I'm putting myself around better people. So I'm very careful. I do my homework. I'm a good girl. I do my homework. I research who I'm around, who I chat with, who I talk with. Because social media is either your friend or your enemy. And there are just as there's good people, there's also bad people. And so in 2015, I met my now adoptive parents, who are my pastors. They're my spiritual parents. They go by spiritual parents. And I met them on Facebook, and he's actually the husband of a retired MMA fighter, and she's a pastor. And so they have their own workout ministry. They do their own church, and I've been with them for 6 years now. And she is just everything I've wanted in a mom, like completely have wanted in a mom. She's opposite of my birth mom. She's compassionate. She's selfless. She's never harmed me, never physically put a hand on me. She's never, she's very respectful. She doesn't allow alcohol in her home, not because of the religious reasons, but because of me. She's very adamant about that. Like, no, like our daughter Heather, like she was in foster care and she was born with this, so we don't want to have alcohol in the home because that would be a stumbling block to her. And I agree with that. You shouldn't. If someone has a struggle with alcohol, you shouldn't be bringing it around somebody, whether it's because they were born with a brain injury because of it, or whether it was an addiction. So they're very, just the sweetest. I could call her right now and say, hey, like, something's going on. I'm not in a safe situation. She would come get. So, and she's amazing. Like, we spend Mother's Day together, birthdays together. I mean, she's always calling to check on me. And she's very, not only should I pastor. So, and it's hard because I've had to separate, like, when she's being mom and when she's being pastor. And I actually got to live with them for 6 months, and that was very eye-opening. But they have a different way of doing things. But she was never abusive. She was very, if I didn't do something right, she'll come to me one-on-one, and she'd be like, okay, like, I could tell if she was upset, but she calmly and patiently said, that's not what I asked you to do. You know, this is what so it's been hard to be like, okay, and then now she's pastor, so I have to, like, separate when she's asking me to do something on a business aspect, and where she's asking because she's asking as a pastor, not as my mother. So it's hard to separate it sometimes, but so they're a positive outlet in my life daily. Like, in fact, she has a book out that is a 30-day devotional. So I've been reading that. That's been helpful. And then my newest thing that's really helping me right now is I have a life coach who is amazing. I met her through Facebook as well. It's actually interesting because I met her after I moved out of California 2 years ago. When my birth dad passed away, I was looking for a therapist, and I knew I was going to need somebody, and I couldn't find the right person. And lo and behold, I moved to Tennessee, and this woman showed up on my Facebook wall and showing like her ad and all her paintings and this and that. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I know I didn't look this girl. I don't even know who this is. So I checked her out, lo and behold, and I kind of take things in three. So if something shows up on my wall 3 times, I kind of take a more heavier interest in it. Like, okay, God, what are you trying to tell me? Like, maybe she could help me. And so sure enough, I did my research. I stalked her Instagram. I stalked her Facebook. I listened to her videos. And I was like, she's really good. Maybe this is something I do need. Like, she does intuitive painting, and I've never even heard of that. I'm like, I do painting, but not like that. Like, I don't even know what the word means. So intuitive painting is basically, I'm painting with what my intuition is wanting me to say. Like, we all have that voice of what's right, what's wrong. Maybe I shouldn't go to the gas station at 10 o'clock at night, you know, that little voice. And so teaching yourself how to paint with that voice, you know, I could probably show you a whole bunch of paintings I did, but my intuition told me to use black glitter. I hate black glitter. Why? I don't know. Like, paint with this color or paint with orange. I never use orange in my paintings. Like, okay. Like, so, and I meet with her weekly, every Thursday night, actually, and we have, you know, a drop-in where she's like, and she asks, how can I support you? I love that question. I like how she asks that. Not what can I do for you, but how can I support you? So basically saying, what's going on in your week? How can I help you? Whether it's, sometimes we do a meditation. Sometimes she's like, I don't want you sitting in a meditation, like, let's work through your grief. Let's work through your pain. Let's go paint this out. Let's get this out until you're better. Reestablishing coping skills that I had for many years, and I had just, because of all the trauma and pain of other events, I had put them on the back burner. So let's re-get those out. Let's reuse them. Taking care of yourself, self-care. Self-care doesn't have to be going on a walk. Self-care could be taking a bath. Self-care can be lighting a candle. Self-care can be, you know, curling up with blankets and a stuffed animal. If that works for you, and if that's how you feel safe, then so be it. So it's just, and then we do journal clubs. So she has me do journaling assignments, and getting into that. And then we do some painting, and then we come back and she's like, what's the takeaway, you know? So I have that support, and so I'm slowly, gradually gaining an inner circle of people that I can trust, that I can like call when I'm in a panic. But the main thing she's training me and teaching me is choosing myself first before I call somebody. Because ultimately, when I'm at work, I can't call somebody. You know, I'm in a room full of kids. I can't go out into an office and grab my phone and call somebody. I have to be able to choose myself. So whether that's rubbing my arm or rubbing my hand, or, you know, I have to take care of myself.
Well, that's really awesome. It sounds like you found yourself a really good support group.
Yes, she's amazing.
You surrounded yourself with some powerful women, you know, and that's really great. I know you've mentioned a few times, you know, that you're special needs. Can you just tell our listeners what your diagnoses are?
Yeah, so my diagnosis, I have several. So Fetal Alcohol Syndrome is the first and foremost. That's the number one diagnosis. I was born addicted to alcohol. The next diagnosis would actually be all mental health diagnosis. So PTSD is obviously the other one. That's always something I've had. And then the other one, I was actually misdiagnosed with bipolar. They diagnosed me with bipolar because that's what my birth mom has. And I'm like, no, I don't think I have it. Like, and the therapist at the time confirmed, like, no, you don't have that. And so I went and re-got diagnosed, and I have borderline personality disorder, which is an attachment and abandonment disorder. And that actually makes more sense, believe it or not. I could see that. Which I do have attachment issues, and I'm working on those, but that is the proper diagnosis name. I was on medications. I was actually on medications for 9 years. They had me on 9 anxiety and depression medications. I
Wow.
actually, very, very scary. I actually almost died. I collapsed down. I actually collapsed down my abuser's flight of stairs in her house in Florida. And that was it for me. I was like, I'm done. Like, I want off of these medications. Like, I cut cold turkey, no joke. Like, literally cut cold turkey. Very thankful and blessed that I didn't have severe reaction to them. I felt like maybe sick to my stomach, but that was it. Like, I didn't have like a.
Some of those medications can be really dangerous just to stop.
Yeah, I was on Zoloft. That was actually my first one. I was on Wellbutrin. I was on Klonopin. I was on, you name it, I was on it. Yeah, it was really bad. In fact, I gained a bunch of weight, like in my stomach. I was a complete zombie. Couldn't even recognize me. And I've been off of medication since 2013. And I'm going to share why I went off of that, because I know people listening and be like, A, that probably wasn't smart. B, like, I'm sure people are wondering, well, how are you coping without medication? I'm not saying go off your medications. That's not what I'm saying. For me, I'm saying I wanted off of them. They were no longer helping. When you get put on 9 medications, that's a red flag. That was a red flag to me. Okay, something's not working. There's no need to be put on 9 medications. Like, that was a big no-no. I felt at the time, and it was weird because I have a mentor who's been my mentor for 15 years now. She actually was like, I told her she was crazy. I was like, Tina, you're crazy. Like, I need these. You couldn't tell me. Like, I couldn't tell you. Like, I wanted to be off of them, but at the time, I was like, no one could tell me different that I didn't need to be, like, I need to be off these medications, because I thought everyone was wrong. Sure enough, she was right, and she's not crazy. I ended up getting off the medications. I went off of them because they weren't helping. I felt like I wasn't really dealing with the core issue, with the root issue. And it was masking the pain. Because in my opinion, in my belief, medications mask the pain. Just like alcohol masks the pain. It masks drugs. It's masking the pain. You're not getting to the root issue. What's the root issue? So yes, it can be helpful, and don't get me wrong, like, if you need to be on a med that is helping, then so be it. But if it's not helping and you're just masking the pain and not dealing with the root issue, then it's time to go talk to your psychiatrist again, because it's just,
I have a friend of mine once who put it this way. He said he was going through a hard patch, and he needed medication to help him get over that hump, and then he was able to get back into real life and deal with that. So yeah, it sounds like that was a real good thing for you to be able to get off of that medication. So I mean, God love you. I mean, you've been through the ringer and back a couple times, it sounds like.
Yep. Hell back.
But you know what, honey? You're still standing.
Yeah, no. Yep.
And that's what I want people to be able to look at, take away from this conversation. I mean, my gosh, I know kids nowadays who have a hard time getting over a breakup with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and their world is falling apart. And I don't know that would even register on the scale, when you start looking at the things you've struggled your way through and came out victorious.
I'm still standing because I chose to not be the victim anymore. I chose to say, okay, I'm not gonna live the life my birth mom made for me. I'm not gonna choose her path. I'm not gonna choose the path that others are choosing for me. I'm not gonna go down that abusive route. I'm not gonna drink alcohol. And a lot of children of alcoholics, they either go on the binge and they drink and they become alcoholics, or they go complete opposite. I'm complete opposite. Like, don't want to be near it, don't want to touch it. Like, I made the choice to say, okay, I'm going to live my life. Is it going to be great? No. Is it going to be trials? Yes. Is it going to be difficult? You better believe it. Like, it's a struggle. Some mornings I just rather crawl in bed and stay under the blankets and not even deal with it. Not even deal with the fact that I'm waking up with body aches every morning, or the fact that I'm waking up at 3 a.m. with anxiety attacks every morning. Like, I would just rather call off of work and not deal with it. But at the end of the day, I have bills to pay. Nobody else is gonna do that. Nobody else is gonna do that. I walk an hour to work every day because I don't drive. I don't have a car. I don't have a license. I either Uber or I walk to work. Not a lot of people would do that. I walk to work, and I get people like, "You walk? Oh my gosh, just tell me, like, I'll pick you up." And I said, that's not the point. The point is, it's my responsibility to get myself to work. It's my responsibility to pay my bills, to do what the adult things to do. It's not about accepting or receiving help. It's the fact that it's my responsibility. It's my duty to show up to work on time. It's my job to get to work. If I have a job, it's my responsibility to get to work. It's not anybody else's job. So I've made that, I'm harsh on myself sometimes, because it's like, I'm choosing. Like, it's just a choice. It's a matter of choosing. Like, are you going to be a victim your whole life, or are you going to get up and make something of yourself?
Well, that's the thing. You have a lot of strength, and it shows. You're out there and you're killing it, and you're killing it every day. And I props to you. Before we wrap it up here, you're a very strong woman. What would you say to the other women out there, the women that have been through the abuse, the sexual abuse, the trauma? What would you tell those women? What would you tell our women that are listening? Your final thoughts.
One, I'm very, very sorry. Nobody should ever have to go through that, whether you're a woman or a man. Nobody should ever have to go through that. Two, if you are struggling, so let me address it this way. So one, if you have gotten out of that situation, but you're struggling with getting support, getting counseling, getting help, please reach out. Whether maybe it's one of us on this podcast reaching out, or somebody in a church. To me, reaching out to somebody in a church is helpful. Find out what your community offers. Maybe it's a support group. Reach out. There's also a sexual assault hotline number you can call. I don't have that on hand. But you can always look it up. If you have access to Wi-Fi and you're able to do or research it, you can grab a number you can call. And two, if you're in the situation and you're trying to get out, please reach out for help. Like, go. Like, call 911. Go. Get out. If you're scared, like, you can reach me. You can find me somewhere. Like, you can reach out to me via social media. You can reach out via podcast. So find a way to reach out, because if you don't, no one's gonna be able to help you. And if you're looking to work through your pain, but you don't have an outlet, again, a pen and paper. Start drawing, start writing. Maybe it's music, maybe it's poetry. Just whatever you gotta do to get through that pain and that trauma. If you're enjoying it right now, start writing, start making poetry. Just write. Another thing for me is reading my Bible again. And I know that sounds shocking, considering that I just said that I just got out of a cult. Like, but my faith is still important. Like, I still go to church on occasion. I still have that in me. And so, yeah, on occasion I'll pick up my Bible and I'll read it. So if you're in it and you think the only way to get through it is to read the Bible, then so be it. But, churches, there are a lot of other great churches that are helpful. So if you're able to reach out to the church, reach out. And stay strong, because you will get out of it. You will. Somebody will help you. Somebody will make a call, or somebody can help you get out of it. But know that you're not alone. That's the most and foremost, is you're not alone. You're not the only one that is going through it, or that has gone through it. You're not alone.
Well, thank you so much for all your time tonight, Heather. really enjoyed hearing your story. It's very powerful. So thank you so much for sharing. And you are correct. There is somebody out there. Reach out. We're here. You can always reach us. We're always willing to try to help where we can and be a listening ear. But with that being said, I think it's probably time to say goodnight.
For sure.
Yeah, I know you have to get up for work tomorrow morning, and unfortunately, so do we.
Nobody pays our bills either, unfortunately. I wish.
But I know you said you had a podcast and a blog, and so we'll make sure that we get that in the show notes. So there'll be some links there so people can come and find you and hear your story. We'll make sure we get the name of the blog on there and the name of the podcast, because you have quite a story to tell. You have a lot of experience to share with people, and that's a valuable resource for anybody who needs that kind of support in a struggling time. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you for your time as well.